It is our solemn duty today to mock California Governor Gavin Newsom to within an inch of his life, because if not us, who? If not now, when? Hey everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. This is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, the reason for today's mockery is the Democrat governor's very badly reviewed new podcast called This is Gavin Newsom Podcast with your host Gavin Newsom, starring Gavin Newsom. And we're going to watch a brief clip of the Gavin Newsom Podcast with your host Gavin Newsom, starring Gavin Newsom, so you can get an idea of what this thing is all about. Now, before I roll the clip, I must warn anyone with epilepsy or other visual stimulus issues not to look directly into his hands.
Seizure alert.
And yeah, actually, nobody should look directly into his hands. So here's the clip.
Conditions that determine our fate and future. And that fundamental notion of agency, I think, is important more broadly. And I think that goes to some of the issues around, victimization. And I see a lot of that, respectively, on the right, increasingly, even with Trump often approaching things from that sort of mindset.
Bill, I like to think of myself as a deeply shallow guy, so I don't want to talk about the content or the meaning of what Newsom said, assuming there's any to be found. Instead, let me ask you just two simple questions. The first is, what in the actual hell is going on with his hands? And the second one is, what in the actual hell is going on with his face?
There's something ain't right with that boy. I was just laughing when you did the introduction because I immediately visualized the thumbnail that everybody saw. Them just Gavin Newsom with the gigantic puppy dog eyes, with the just a joke. So Gavin Newsom, since I've had to live here under his tyrannical rule, up until the LA fires, was a guy who I certainly didn't respect him, but I didn't quite fear him, but I thought he was formidable. I thought he was a formidable standard bearer for the Democratic Party, young, good looking, fast on his feet, smooth talker, all that stuff. I'd known about all of his, crimes and peccadillos, what he did to San Francisco and how he was at the French Laundry restaurant shoulder to shoulder with 8 medical professionals in the middle of the lockdown, nobody wearing masks, so all of that. But it was the fires that unmasked Gavin Newsom. It was the LA fires. He looked confused, out of his depth. He looked hysterical one moment, dodging responsibility the next. Well, why weren't the reservoirs filled? Well, it's not my responsibility to fill the local reservoirs. I'm only responsible for the water that fills the reservoirs. I'm not responsible for actually filling them. That whole thing. So when I saw that he was doing a podcast, I realized that Gavin Newsom, either through polling or through some reptile-like vague sense of self-preservation, realizes that he is in very, very, very deep trouble. That he has been badly, badly, badly harmed by not just the damage he did to the state of California that made the fires so destructive, but especially the optics of his response. It was absolutely tone deaf. 2 days after he came down and denied responsibility for anything, he got out there and he was doing the shoulder wag thing, and he was saying, we're going to build a brand new LA. It's going to be LA 2.0. He's almost like Steve Martin, it's almost, it's just like, he's a wild and crazy guy. He was talking about, we're going to build LA 2.0 and it's going to be a smart city and it's going to be a green city and it's going to be, and people are still looking at the remains of their, of their smoking pianos, and everything about his reactions were off. And that's when I stopped worrying about Gavin Newsom, because I realized that Gavin Newsom even had me under there's a great word, the original meaning of this word is glamour. He's a glamorous guy, Gavin Newsom. He's a good-looking, glamorous guy. But the original meaning of the word glamour is a spell that is cast. It's an illusion that dark forces would use to fool you into thinking that they were somebody else. And so he is a glamorous guy. But what I realized after the fire, Steve, was that there's no there there. He's not a leader. He plays a leader. He knows how to look the part. But when push comes to shove, brave Sir Gavin ran away. Unlike another national level politician who, when bullet came to zing, didn't just cower and run away, but basically stood straight up and basically dared any other shooters that were there to take a second crack at him, put his fist in the air and say, fight, fight, fight. Those moments, those crisis moments, are when you reveal your true character. And Donald Trump revealed his true character at Butler, and Gavin Newsom revealed his true character in the smoldering ruins of Malibu and Pacific Palisades.
Wow, well said. And, I'd forgotten all about that shoulder shrugging thing, which just, when I saw that, I expected him to go, I'm an excellent governor. Excellent governor. It was one of the most off-putting things.
Exactly.
We're counting votes.
I'd ever seen up until just that 19-second clip of him from his podcast. Scott, I do want to get a little bit into the content of the Gavin Newsom podcast with your host Gavin Newsom, starring Gavin Newsom, because it sucks. If it's supposed to have any kind of effect on the public perception that Bill says he needs to repair, it's not working. Of the few people who have watched the thing, and this is all according to a poll conducted of viewers by Sacramento's Capital Weekly, favorability amongst liberals declined from 46% to 30%. Some Republicans agreed with his stances, but they overwhelmingly viewed him as insincere, calling him fake and pandering. His net favorability dropped from +4 to -6. That's a 10-point swing in the wrong direction. And only 13% of voters had an improved perception of him. And only 1 in 5 said the podcast made them want to tune in for more. Now, Scott, to be totally fair, those numbers are partly because Newsom had on a couple of conservatives as his guests and at least pretended to agree with him on some hot-button issues. But mostly, I think those bad numbers are just because there's something off-putting and weird and insincere about that guy.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to judge his entire podcast by those 19 seconds, but I think that those I think those 19 seconds were an effective prophylactic. I think there's no risk of me actually seeing any more of his podcast.
I almost did a spit take.
He seemed very conscious of the fact that it was on video, and I don't think he realizes if anybody tunes in, so to speak, most of the people are going to actually be listening, not watching. Like, it seemed like he felt uncomfortable with the static camera shot, and he had to make it visually exciting. I'm attributing way too much cognition to what his behavior there. 90% of communication, face-to-face communication, is visual rather than verbal. And so people are constantly reading your facial expression, your gesticulation. They're getting a sense from your posture, whether you believe what you're saying. And if you evaluate his effectiveness at communication on that basis, I think his pollsters and his handlers are going to be deeply troubled by what he's putting down here. Like, people are not going to pick up what he's putting down. The other thing, the first thought that occurred to me when I saw it was, oh, wow, I guess he's just getting started and they couldn't afford to pay the ASL translator because he seemed to be doing his own signing. And then I was watching what his hands were doing. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not sign language. That's just uncontrollable twitching. Like, he's got some form of Tourette's that he cannot control what he's doing with his hands.
He's scared.
Yeah, he seemed very uncomfortable for a guy who spent most of his life in front of a camera, and for a guy who the camera favors, frankly. He just didn't seem comfortable winging it. The podcast format is actually a good way to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. When you have to sit in front of a microphone, as Bill well knows, for an hour or 2 hours, or as Bill's Stratosphere Lounge program is 17 hours long, you get the idea that this guy there's no depth to him because he can't handle the long format. He can only handle the
about me or-
packaged news conference or the little snippets or the interviews where everything's really structured. So I don't think this is going to reflect well on him. Any talk that he's the potential Democratic nominee the next time around seems unlikely, except if he starts playing more clips of Kamala Harris. Because I just watched a clip of her this week and I was like, I still have no idea what you're talking about, woman. So if he puts a lot of that out there, people may look at that and go, hey, it could be worse.
Hey, Steve, can I jump in on something Scott said?
Please.
Because he was talking about the whole appeal of a podcast is authenticity. And this is why this was a terrible choice for him.
Yeah.
And he reminded me, as Scott was talking, he reminded me of Hillary Clinton, who also has nothing but contempt for regular people, and when they try to affect the common touch, they just don't know what to do. They are literally, and I use that word literally. Yeah. They are mimicking what they believe the appropriate emotional response to be, but it's just a guess, because there's no human connection there, and whoever thought that a podcast would be a good idea for a guy who's nothing but image is a really, really, really bad advisor.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, to call Gavin Newsom ambitious is to do it's an insult to people like Caesar, who only conquered all of Gaul. We all kind of assume that he's running for president in 2028. In fact, there are Amazon tribes that are so primitive and secluded, they've never heard of California, they've never heard of Gavin Newsom, they've never heard of presidential politics, they've never heard of the United States. And they're going, man, that guy's going to run for president. But there's a GOP strategist, California-based, I believe, Mark Madrid, who thinks that Newsom is aiming for something that Madrid called even bigger than president. And that is, Gavin Newsom wants to be the next Joe Rogan. And to do that, as Bill and Scott were saying, you need, first of all, authenticity, the kind you can't even fake in the old joke. And as I look at this, as I look at his career, his progress as a politician, it's really a sign of how bad, how warped California has become, that this guy, Gavin Newsom, got elected to anything other than most punchable face in high school. And that's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.